All right, good morning.
Good morning.
First, I'd like to thank you guys for giving the opportunity to conduct this presentation, especially the management. My presentation is, well, it's about communication, things that's important in our life that we do on a daily basis, whether it's at home, personal relationships, school, whatever the case may be, especially at our job, okay? The components of communications, of course, starting with the sender, okay? The guy or the person giving the information out or idea out. The message is being sent, and of course, encoding, how that message is being sent by that person, okay? Communication channels, how you use or what you use the media or how you use, whatever you use to communicate with that person. The next part is the receiver, which is the other important component of communication. And of course the feedback, what you get from the communication and what you give back to the person that's sending the information to you. But we're going to concentrate on the receiving part of the communication, and specifically the listening process. Okay, these are the things that sometimes we neglect or we forget what's important about the listening part of communication. The one thing I will tell you, there's two words that we use almost the same way, but they have two different meanings. And those two words are hearing and listening. Okay? As you can see from the information up there, they're two totally different things, but we always use them synonymously, basically meaning the same thing. If you look at that definition of each one, Will, what do you think the difference is between the two?
One seems to be more active, the other one more passive.
Okay? So the passive process of hearing, like I can be talking to Jeremy over here, but I can hear somebody talking on that side, but I'm not listening to them. But at that same time, what does that do to my communication process with Jeremy? Right, it's not being effective. I'm missing things that might be important in the process, and then when I return that information back to him, it may not be what he's expecting from me. There's a difference between hearing and listening to your conversation. The listening process. The processes, the first one, of course, is being mindful. What does being mindful mean to you when it comes to listening? Anyone?
Being open-minded to what the other person is actually saying to you.
Exactly. Okay, that's part of it. The other part is focusing on the person speaking. Focusing on the person speaking. I'll give you an example. When the football game is on at my house, and OU's playing, and my wife's talking to me from the kitchen, all I hear is wah, 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 wah.
I just want to let you know your wife is going to see this.
I understand, and she knows that. Because at the end of the conversation, what does she say? Are you listening to me? And she knows I'm not. She knows I'm not. Because I'm watching a football game. And a lot of people are like that. Okay? So that's what that means. Giving that attention to that person that's actually speaking to you. Okay? So that's very important. So there's two things that it allows you to do when you're being mindful about the conversation. The first thing is it increases the understanding of their thoughts and feelings. Okay? It allows you to understand what that person is feeling and understand what they're trying to, information they're trying to give you. And it also promotes a more complete communication by the other person. What that means is, if you show attentiveness and you're listening, they're more apt to give you more information. Very important in the field that we're in, right? Being able to hear everything, the feelings that they're expecting you to give back in response later on. The other part of the process is physically receiving the message. Okay? What that means is actually hearing the words, the sounds, and interpreting nonverbal behaviors. It's still up there on the board, but we talk about communication. 7% of it is words, 38% is tone, and 55% is your body language, right? So that's what that means, by receiving the information, not just the words, but actually looking at the person and knowing what their body language is showing you, and understanding what their physical body language is showing you. And sometimes, I had a customer one time, and I think you met him, they had the trachea. He could not talk. Everything, the way we communicated was through writing or his phone. He was typing in his phone and texting it to me because he couldn't talk. It was hard to make that sale for that customer. And it took me a long time to get through it. And then one other time is I lost my voice one time, and I had to talk to a customer, and everything was on the paper, on pad. And that's the way I communicated. So it's very important that you're able to get, and basically when that situation happens, you're more apt to listen more or pay attention more by either reading the lips or whatever the case may be. Okay? Selecting and organizing the information is the next step. Selecting and organizing the information. What does that mean? That means in our own lives, we have a certain way that we listen to certain people because of what we think about that person. What I mean by that, it's called, they call it cognitive schemata in the book that I'm reading, okay? So we organize the perception of that person. If Brandon was speaking up here, you'd probably more be attentively to him because he's the GM, okay? Because I'm just one of your colleagues, you may not be more, you may be just passing through one ear and not the other, okay? But that's how we kind of organize the people that we're listening to. We prejudge, basically, okay? And at that same time, we also tend to stereotype. Because we tend to know, we think we know what that person is going to say next, and we don't listen to the actual conversation. And these things happen in your head, you may not pay attention to it, okay? The other thing, you start thinking about if that person's going to be honest with you or not. If that person is reasonable or not, or that person is smart or not. These are things that we start thinking about in our head before just by looking at that person, or stereotyping that person, or because we have a prototype at that person and how we should listen to them and how we should talk to them. So these things happen and we're not even aware of them. The next thing is interpreting the communication. What we mean by that is the process of organizing and making sense of the communication that's happening between you and that other person. Okay? We start to organize. We start to find out what's important to that person or what's important to you. And sometimes we don't listen to the whole conversation. We listen to what's important to us to make our job easier, right? Because I'll be listening to somebody, and then I'll go into the room, and Chad will ask me, what does this person do? And I'm like, I'm sure he said it, but I can't remember. Because at that time it wasn't important, but it should have been important, right? Because you notice when the questions they're going to ask you. So those are the things that, you know, we being attentive, active listener can help you with the process that we do on a daily basis. So that's one of the things that's also being able to interpret the communication that's happening between you and that person. The next one is responding. Not just in your words and how you speak to somebody, but in your body language as the person is speaking. Showing attentiveness, showing that you're alert, showing that you're listening, that allows that person to even give you more information because they think you are listening to them. They think you want to hear everything they want to say. That actually works. I've experienced that. Not just in this job as a first sergeant in the Army. When a person comes into my office having a problem at home with the spouse or whatever, they may not want to give you all the information. They only want to give you what they feel they should be able to give you, and you as the person that's supposed to solve the problem for it. But when you show that you're concerned and you show that you want to hear everything, they give you more than what they think they're trying to give you. They give you a lot more information. It allows you to be able to provide a service or the help that they actually need. It's the same thing with this job. The one thing that we talk about is problem solving. When a person comes in here to purchase a vehicle, it's usually because they have a problem to solve. And sometimes we don't know what that problem is, but if we listen good enough or well enough and be attentive of what they're talking about, it may come out without you even knowing it. Because sometimes we assume we know what the problem is instead of actually listening to that conversation. So those are the things that may help you also with this job. The last thing is remembering. This is the final part of the listening process. In the book that I read, about 8 hours after receiving a message, we only recall about 35% of what we interpreted during the communication. 35%, that's what, a third of a conversation that you have with somebody, okay? So hopefully, the third that you do remember is the part that's very important through the process that we go through. But those are just the processes that we go through when we're listening. Can they help you be a better listener? If you're aware of them. If you're aware of them, it can make you a better listener. It may be able to help you provide a better service to that customer, to that person you're speaking with. I'm not just talking about customer. I'm also talking about your personal lives, about everything that you engage in on your daily basis. Communications happens 24 hours a day. Okay, 24 hours a day, even when you're sleeping. Believe it or not, some of you talk in your sleep, and your wife might be sitting there listening to what you're saying and remind you what you said the next day, right? So those things happen. I say wife, but the husband can too. Okay, so I'm just saying, the spouse might be able to be listening also. But those are just the key points of the listening process. Are there any questions about anything I talked about, or any comments? Yes, sir.
How can you be a better communicator?
How can you be a
Like,
better,
how can you be a better communicator?
how can you be a better communicator? First of all, be knowledgeable in what you're talking about. Okay? Be knowledgeable in what you're talking about. Sometimes we tend to talk about something